This is the Leadership Expedition podcast. I'm your host, Bob Markovich. Today I have a guest with me. His name is Brian MacArthur. Brian, how are you today?
Doing great. It's great to see you and great to hear your voice, buddy.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Thanks for joining the podcast. So why don't you let the listeners know a little bit about Brian MacArthur, who you are, where you're from, what you do, what you did, all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, I usually say I'll try not to go back to the day I was born, but I guess the first thing that comes up is the day I was born, right? So I grew up in Long Island and found my way to San Diego in college, met a nice girl in San Diego, and we stayed and have kind of built a family here. And you and I met in the early 2000s as I was an internal wholesaler at Sun America, and you were a divisional manager running, I think, the whole Eastern United States and the Midwest, and had a great wholesaling career, really grateful for it. And about 10 years ago, as you know, had some events pop up that kind of forced some change, all of which were very difficult, but I'm very grateful for now. And I've built a company called Design My Medicare, which kind of, is a parallel business to the financial advisor community. And I still feel like a wholesaler in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways, we're way more involved in our financial advisor partners practice than I ever was as a wholesaler. That's what's up.
Talk to me a little bit about growing up on Long Island. What did you do? What kind of high school did you go to? Did you play sports?
Yeah, so I went to Connect Quad High School, which probably won't mean a lot to most of the people listening or watching, but yeah, just grew up in a town called Ronkonkoma. It's all Native American names. And, if I meet anybody, I tell them you probably stopped for gas on the way to the Hamptons one time. But, just great kind of middle-class community, played, Little League and Pop Warner, and wrestled in 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. My biggest regret was ever stopping. But, got a lot of childhood, lifetime friends that I'm very grateful for. And as much as I love living in San Diego, every time I go back to Long Island and see an old buddy, I just always ask myself, man, have I made this good a friend in 30 years of being in San Diego? So it's just a lot of good memories there. I was, my parents got divorced when I was younger, and I was raised by my late stepfather. To this day, I consider the greatest gift I've ever been given. And then, did 2 years of community college and found my way out in San Diego, found my way
So
out to San Diego.
you went to the University of San Diego? Okay. So, and that's where you met your wife. And I mean, I love San Diego, right? McPee's Irish Pub is my favorite
Yeah.
restaurant in the entire world. And gosh, the Del Coronado, Seal Beach. Yeah, I love that part of the world, man. Love it, love it,
It's
love it.
easy living, and it's an easy place to play tour guide.
Well, that's cool. So, so this is the Leadership Expedition podcast, and the idea here is I want to chat with people that have had a jungle moment or a jungle period of time, and the way that I describe a jungle moment, just give a brief background. And well, I was in the jungle, and I decided to go on a solo hike over a mountain to go snorkeling. And, everything was well and good until all of a sudden you're off the beaten path and you realize that the jungle is soaking wet, and you realize that there's some vicious animals out there. And, then I see these fixed ropes to help me get over. And I went from, boy, this is going to be great, to, boy, why am I doing this, to all of a sudden uber focused, right? When you're in the middle of that jungle experience, your body doesn't know, isn't understanding what's going on, but you want to survive. So as a result of wanting to survive, you start seeing everything. And I saw, an army of ants. I saw this, what I thought was an orange rock on the side of a mountain that turned out to be a crab, things that would have not seen unless I was there by myself. So let's jump into that. Let's jump into your jungle experience, what happened, how that changed your life, and go from there.
Yeah, so I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you about this. It's funny when you have certain life experiences and you wonder, am I supposed to share this with everybody? Am I supposed to share it with nobody? Is it something in between? And, I try to remove myself and my ego as much as possible, which I probably never totally succeed at. But I'm always hopeful that, some of my experiences could be helpful to others, and nice opportunity to chat with you about that. But yeah, so I had a pretty good career as a insurance or annuity wholesaler. Back to yours and my prior careers, was always kind of a, mid-tier performer, probably times maybe less than a mid-tier performer. I can kind of look back and observe of why that is a little bit more clearly now than when I was in it. But, I know everybody says they put a high value on relationships, but I've just always done a pretty good job of staying in touch with people. And some portion of that translated into, getting to work for some terrific big employers in the wholesale distribution space of the investment and insurance community. About 12 years ago, I had a couple job jumps, and I was kind of moving down the tier of employers in the wholesaling space, so the wrong direction, if you will. And then I had this opportunity to work for Lincoln Financial Group and be the Lincoln Money Guard wholesaler, which was like the quintessential long-term care solution for higher net worth people. All my best relationships, all of the big advisory firms where I had relationships with, I was kind of getting to go back and kind of got this second shot, if you will. So I had a lot of great people kind of, really endorse me to get that position, and kind of pretty quickly I found myself underperforming their expectations and mine. Again, for reasons I can kind of see a little bit more clearly. And about a year into it, I was driving. Actually, I was in Vegas and meeting with advisors, like 1 or 2 night trip, and I had to drive home that night. And I had a meeting with my divisional manager, Andy Clark, who is just a terrific guy. We're still very close. And I had this meeting with him at like 4 p.m. in a gas station in Summerlin, Nevada. And he basically said, hey, we've tried a bunch of different things here. We need to put you on this probationary period. And I kind of knew it was coming, but I, listened. And to his credit, he said, Brian, I've had other people in this situation before, and half of them make it and thrive and half of them don't. But he said, I really believe that working together, we could make this work. So of course I listened politely. I hung up the phone and probably, started projecting all of my frustration onto him like he was the villain, right? Which I was very, very good at. And hopped in the car, started driving back to San Diego. And I don't think Andy knows this part, but I'm just sitting here again, treating him like the villain. And then I kind of got this point where I said, Brian, who are you kidding, dude? This guy is in your corner. He told you he is. Everything he's ever done has demonstrated that he is. And you're not going to get through this by treating him like he's the bad guy, right? So one, you need to figure some stuff out, but you also need to take him at his word that he's there to help you, right? So I'm just like trying to kind of reframe this in my head, because I was very good at kind of finding the more, negative or at least less positive way to look at things. So, and it didn't come natural to me nearly as much as it does now, Bob. Not saying I'm perfect at it, but I'm better than I've ever been. And I'm driving, and I wasn't really, that involved in my faith. I turned on like Joel Osteen because he was the only, just to try to listen to somebody. So anyway, as this whole thing progresses, I got about a 4-hour drive home, starts pouring rain. And at about 11:30 at night, I'm coming down this downhill stretch of I-15. When I say it's pouring, like, I don't know. It's just like buckets kind of coming on down. And if you've been in California, which I know you have, nobody knows how to drive in the rains. It's like they talk about why the back of a deer's tail is white, because the deer behind them is just following that white spot. If you see taillights in front of you doing 75, 80 miles an hour in the rain in California, you're just following the taillights. It's just the way it is out here. So, I'm kind of driving and just trying to find my way to positivity on this situation. And as I'm in the fast lane, these set of headlights pop out of the left shoulder. So, the fast lane is, I have some on the left side, I should see taillights, and out of nowhere, because it's really foggy, two headlights, excuse me. Last thing you'd expect are headlights, right? And I'm going this way, and then suddenly there's 2 headlights poking at me, which scared the stuffing out of me. And then as quickly as I saw that, I see a second set of headlights facing me. And I don't know why, but in that moment, and we were, so I'm in the fast lane, here's the shoulder where these cars are facing me. And then there's this big steep hill that comes down to the freeway. And it was just really, really clear to me that the people in these cars were in a difficult spot. There was no emergency services. I just quickly concluded and just somehow had the awareness that this must have just happened. If these people get out of their cars, there's almost nowhere for them to run because that hill was really steep. And 2, if they sit in those cars and somebody hits them, they're going to get killed. So I don't know why I saw that in the moment I did, but it was very, very clear to me. And I decided to pull over because I thought if I pull over ahead of those two cars and I can get the occupants from those two cars into my car, if the first car gets hit, it's going to get pushed down the shoulder into the second car and then into mine. So I just thought if I'll be the third car ahead to kind of move everybody there. And that was my only plan.
So let me, just let me for a second. So here you are, right? You meet what's end. You're upset. You're angry. You just had a conversation with your divisional sales manager. You're driving like you normally do in the rain, and you want to get home because you got to let some steam off, and you got to create a plan. All these things have to be going through your mind while you're driving this car, even if Joel Osteen is on in the background, right? We want to fix the problem. We want to solve the situation. And the only thing that you can think of is you need to get out of your car to go help the other people. Is that what pops in your mind?
Yeah, I was just very aware immediately of the danger they were in. And so, part of that, you know, and maybe it's people have tried to explore like, why did you stop and that sort of thing. But also I think I was coming to terms with how much I had half-assed so much in my life and not put in 100%. And again, in this drive of like projecting my failure upon my manager, who was a terrific guy, and had I done everything he told me to do, I wouldn't have been in this situation. And then realizing like, oh my gosh, this is all my fault, right? And then I think I pulled over because it was clear to me that I felt like there was something I could do or should do or had to do or was being called upon to do. So yeah, so but that was, yeah, I think that's an accurate recap of my state of mind. And then I pull over.
Okay, so you pulled over, and then
So then I run back. The first car I come up on is the second car I passed, right? Because I passed them both. And there's this young kid, and I said, "Are you all right?" He said, "Yeah." And then the way he described what happened didn't make sense to me, but would make sense to me later. I figured the two cars bumped into each other and they both kind of spun off the road. I just, why would two cars be there if they didn't, collide and kind of lose control and land on the shoulder facing the wrong direction? And then he told me that his car flew over the other car. And I was like, it didn't even make sense. So I said, well, why don't you go sit in my car? So I kind of sent him to my car, which is now ahead of the other two, so the disabled cars could absorb an impact if it was to happen. And that's my biggest fear in that moment. And that's what I was hoping to accomplish when I pulled over and got out. So I do that. Then I look up and realize, oh my gosh, there was the other car, which is the first car I had passed. And that one was even closer to the path of traffic. And I look up. Now I'm looking at silhouettes here, right? Because I'm looking against traffic. It's fog, it's rain, everything's reflecting, and I got thousands of headlights staring at me. And in that shoulder, I see the silhouette of two people. And I don't know if they're walking away from me or towards me, but to me, they're in the most danger, right? Because they were in the first car. And I start sprinting towards them, and thankfully they were walking towards me. So I got them and escorted them into my car. And now everything I hoped to accomplish by pulling over, I'm pretty much there, right? So I call 911 because there's no EMS yet. And there's thousands of cars going down the freeway. I mean, it's just like constant. And we don't have a lot of room to work because we got this steep hill, we got the shoulder, and then we have 75-mile-an-hour cars whizzing by us, kicking, spray on us. So I call 911. I tell them where we are. They ask if they need medical. Nobody did. So I wave off medical, and they said, okay, we'll be there. And I hang up the phone, and I just have this adrenaline dump. So just everything's going to be okay is what I was thinking, what I was feeling. And the moment that the K in K of okay hit my head, I hear another crash, and I look up the freeway, and another car had lost control up the freeway. Didn't see that, just heard it. Flips over on its roof and slides like 150 yards down the freeway, kind of bouncing off this hill on the shoulder, and totals the car of the couple that I had just put into my car. So exactly what I was fearing would happen to these people if they stayed in their car is now happening, except that thankfully they're in my car, right? So the adrenaline dumps over. I kind of, just ramp up again. And actually, forgive me, I actually still had 911 on the phone at that moment. And I just told him, don't send medical. We'll wait here. And then I hear that, I look at that and I said, "Oh my God, another car just crashed." I said, "You should probably send medical." And the lady said, "Okay." And then she hung up. And I had no idea what to do, right? Because I mean, talking to 911 is like your security blanket, I guess. So I'm drenched. I mean, it is as wet out as I'm as wet as you could be. So is everybody else, short of jumping into a pool with your clothes on. Like that's how much rain is coming down. So I stop and I basically start sprinting back up the freeway to the car of the couple that's in my car and this upside down car because there's one or more people in this upside down car. And I'm sprinting as quickly as I can, but looking at silhouettes again. And I get about 30 yards out and I see three guys get out and run up the hill. The hill was steep. It was navigable, but it was very, very muddy, this big, steep, muddy hill. And I don't have room in my car anymore. So that's really where I was running to tell them to go. So I saw that they were well enough to run. I just see silhouettes of guys running up the hill. There's one moment where one of the guys gets into a shadow. So for a brief second, I see white t-shirt, red shorts, red shoes running up, and then he goes back into a silhouette. So there's three guys, and I think, thank God they're okay enough to run. I just called 911 2 minutes before these guys crashed. Who the hell wouldn't want that, right? And I just had this decision, Bob, where I said, if I keep advancing on these guys, it's no longer going to decrease their risk because they got up the hill, which is where I was running, and it's not going to decrease theirs. It's only going to increase mine. So I go from this moment of thinking of everybody to suddenly feeling comfortable that I can think of my own safety, which turns out to be pretty pivotal. And the moment I think of myself, I turn around, I take about 10 steps back to get to my car, and I'm scared to death to be there because I feel like we're all humans trapped in this bowling alley. And obviously something's happening that is making like every, I don't know, thousandth car lose control on the freeway, come sliding against the shoulder, bounce off the hill, and it's all coming into this freeway shoulder. So I think of myself, I turn my back, I take 10 steps towards my car, and about the 10th step, I hear another impact. And at this point, my head's like on a swivel, and I whip around back looking at silhouettes, and I see another car that is crashing into the upside down car and the car of the couple that's in my car. And I see this body fly through the air at about 20 feet in the air. And that was kind of the moment that I just kind of knew something kind of changed my brain because I knew rationally what I saw, but I was now detached from understanding it. And what happened, sometimes I do a bad job of bringing this up, is I'll fast forward. The three guys were not three guys, Bob. They were three 17-year-old kids. And I didn't know that in the moment. And it was kind of my first moment where I realized I don't remember what it's like to be 17. So basically, this is my theory, but there's no other explanation. I saw those guys in the hill. I was okay with the fact that they were as safe as they could be until the EMS got there. I turned my back. Two out of the three kids ran off the hill to dig through their upside down car for weed, or what. Weed wasn't legal. I'm just kind of speculating. I don't know. And in that moment, while one kid was on his belly digging through the car, another kid was standing right next to it. Another car came in, hit him, killed one kid instantly, and tossed another kid through the air. So I have this kind of detachment of reality in that moment because it was the exact opposite. I never felt in control. I just felt like I was trying to help. Then I felt like I helped, and then I had this adrenaline dump, and then suddenly there's this guy, the second car accident, and my adrenaline ramps back up, and I run towards them, and then I think they're going to be okay. So now I have another adrenaline dump, and then this final accident happens, and I see the body fly through the air and everything like that. So then I go to call 911 again, and I don't know if you've ever tried swiping an iPhone when it's wet, but you can't open it up. And not that they were going to get there any faster, I just didn't know what to do. So I couldn't do that. So I stowed the phone and I start sprinting back up the freeway to where these now three wrecked cars are. The last place I want to be going on earth, but I just kind of know that somebody's hurt or somebody needs something. And I run around these cars, and there's a young kid standing in the shoulder, way closer to the moving traffic than to the hill. And I run up to him, and I said, I look at him, and he said, "My best friend just died." And I said, "I know." I said, you have to get on the hill. And he said, he was my best friend. He was my homie. And I said, "I know." I said, I'm so sorry. You have to get on the hill. And we have this conversation about 3 or 4 times. And I'm going from wanting to help. I still want to help. But when I saw him, I mean, in my head, it was going to take 2 seconds to tell him to get up on the hill. And we're kind of in the most dangerous place on earth for this, like, minute or so. And his brain can't tell his body to move. And I don't want to be there, but I make a commitment. I can't leave without him. And I kind of get to this moment where I've been trying so hard, probably just to validate all of the half-assing I've done to get me to this point that hours before I get on performance probation. And 3 car accidents happen, and I am like rapidly accepting the change, not freaking out, and then just like, what can I do? And I was not very good at that. I'm not the guy that you would have relied on when things get difficult, but I did that 3 times in 3 minutes, and every time I thought it was going to get better, it was now getting worse, right? And there's really nothing worse than somebody dying. So I kind of get into this moment where I realize I don't want to be here, but I can't leave without this kid. I couldn't aggress towards him, Bob, because like when his best friend got killed, he probably took a couple steps back. So I mean, he's like, if he took 2 decent steps back, he'd be in that fast lane. And people would hit him before they even saw him. Like, that's how like dark and foggy it is. There's no visibility. And I feel like this kid is basically the equivalent of like standing on a cliff. And if you move towards somebody whose heels were up at the end of a cliff too quickly, they might step back, right? So now I get to this point where I've tried so hard. Every time I thought it was going to get better, it got worse. I accepted it. I tried harder. I'm just trying the heart, like first time in maybe my adult life that I've just been all in, like no excuses, just doing what I can, no ego behind it, just trying to be helpful. And he can't move, and I feel like I can't move towards him. And I kind of have this moment where I realize I don't know if I'm getting out of here, and I know I can't, and I'm not leaving without him. And there's a saying that there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole, and I'm not an atheist, but I wasn't very rooted in my faith at the time, and I'm working on that now. But that saying, there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole, is basically saying, hey, when the stuff hits the fan and there's nothing left, you're gonna pray. And I can tell you personally, and I wasn't, very grounded in my faith. I'm a believer, but not very grounded in my faith. But I will tell you, because I've been in that situation, you will absolutely pray, because I got to the point where I just say, I don't know if I'm getting out of here, but I can't leave without this kid. I stopped looking up the freeway, because I'm waiting for the next set of headlights to come down that shoulder. And I stopped looking because I now have no control over it, and I don't know what to do. And this is seconds after trying my hardest at anything in my adult life. And I basically prayed and I said, God, just give me 15 seconds without another car accident so I can figure out what to do. And the words that came to me, as clearly as any unspoken words, or they were unspoken, but as clear as any spoken words, were hug him. And it came so rapidly and so clearly, and I accepted it. I'd rapid accept, and I just thought, that totally makes sense, but I couldn't aggress towards him. And you and I were talking about surrendering a moment before we started recording. And I basically stopped looking up the freeway. I just accepted where I was, because I'm now completely out of control. And I just put my arms out and stared at him, hoping and praying that he would walk towards me, because I was so afraid to walk towards him and have him take a step back and get killed. And I just put my arms out, acknowledging the moment, and he walked towards me, and I hugged him for 10 of the longest seconds of my life. Part of me wanted to grab him as soon as he was closer and rip him up the hill, but that just wasn't what I was told to do, right? And I hugged him for about 10 seconds, and I kind of grabbed his shoulders and kind of made him look at me. And I said, yeah, you have to get back on the hill. And that kind of broke the moment. So he was able to kind of get up on the hill. And then I had this decision of like, am I running back to my car, which requires me to turn my back on this mayhem? And every part of what I had feared has happened 2 or 3 times now. Or do I run ahead of the car accidents and then try to jump up go up the hill? So that's what I choose to do, because I was petrified to turn my back on this stuff. So I ran 40, 50 yards up the hill, up the shoulder, then traversed the hill. It was just very muddy. Like you couldn't go up at an angle. Like, it took every bit of the friction that stepping forward would get you to kind of get any elevation. So everything I just shared with you, Bob, was about 3.5 minutes. And at that point, now I'm, up on the hill waiting for EMS.
That is an absolutely powerful story, Brian. I can see emotionally it still drains you, and it's still with you today. So let's take a look at this. So I just typed out a question, right? You're there 3.5 minutes, and it's 3.5 minutes of just absolute chaos from just chaos, chaos, chaos. So the first question is how do you stay in control during chaos? Again, before we recorded, we were talking about reacting, right? I mean, is it just, I mean, is it because you're present, or is it because all of a sudden your body's natural functions are taking over? Or is it just about survival? So how in that period of time, in that chaos, first of all, can you all of a sudden enter a situation of prayer, right? No atheists in foxholes. You're entering a situation of prayer. You're asking for help. It looks like that answer was given to you. Hug him. In that hug, you're able to get him back into safety. But the whole 3.5 minutes chaos. How do you stay in control?
Yeah, so I haven't really done any academic research, but I will tell you it's really got me fascinated about how your brain operates in situations like that. And if you think of whether you look at it as fight or flight, which I think, if you just know that term, you believe that that was a situation that I was in, but also, there's that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That we tend to intellectualize, but I almost wonder if the brain, behaves that way as well, right? So it's like food, shelter, don't get eaten, and you can't really have a personal relationship until you're with anyone until you're comfortable with the fact that you've got some level of safety. Um, if I just look at a lot of it, just biologically or physiologically, it's pretty amazing to be able to observe what your brain does in those situations because it's feeding the most necessary part in the moment. And in order to do that, assuming there's some zero sum game of limited inventory of resources within your brain, it shuts plenty of other things down. I my awareness was so acute, kind of like you were talking about in the jungle, but it was 100% tunnel vision. I mean, I experienced a level of hyper focus that I wouldn't know how to get to or train myself to get to. It was insane. There were parts of it that as I was kind of processing the event that like I used to skydive a lot and since I had kids, I don't really do that anymore, but I always enjoyed that because it really required 100% of me. It was just high consequence situations, and I really hadn't felt anything like that since I had skydived, and I had a little bit of guilt about that, but that's not really where the focus of me recovering from this event emotionally needed to be. But I was remember not being able to see peripherally. I mean, it was like, but everything in my field of vision was so keen and so succinct. So I think your body does a lot of it. And maybe that's another way to say that I think, other people who might say, well, I don't know if I would have done this or done that. Like I don't really, I think naturally, thankfully, most people don't have to be in a situation like that. But I think a lot of my response was just biological and just what what your brain does or tells you to do in those situations.
The great Stoic Marcus Aurelius says the obstacle becomes the way, right? Here's a situation where the obstacle became the way. And here's a situation where you didn't even have to think about it. Again, if it's fight or flight, put you in that situation, it's the obstacle, it's the way. I mean, I've never, ever, ever looked at that quote by Marcus Aurelius in that way before, where you really don't have the freedom, right? You don't have the freedom to make a different choice. Right? You're so engaged in what's going on. The main event here is the obstacle. You have to fight through the obstacle. The obstacle becomes the way.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great insight. I mean, it was, even to this day, I mean, it's incredibly vivid. And I've made a lot of progress with kind of putting it on a shelf in my head where where that box only gets opened if I choose to open it and do some work on that, and then close the box, put it back on the shelf. I mean, for the first couple of years, it was involuntarily falling off the shelf into my lap whenever it wanted, which was very very, very difficult, and took me several years to get feel like I was in charge of whether I'm going to feel that or contemplate it or work on it today. But yeah, no, that's a great concept of the obstacle is a way, and a lot of it felt very involuntary, so I don't really judge it. It's just the path that I was, on, and a lot of good things have come out of it. I mean, I've found gratitude in areas that I didn't think gratitude could exist, and some things are just pretty awful and you can't really find gratitude, and you have to find acceptance and probably, surrender that to God, because we just don't have to, intellectualize or have to understand every single thing to move past it.
So here you are, in this situation, 3.5 minutes of chaos. Then EMS shows up, and what happens from there? Do people get out of your car? Do you get on the road on the way home? I mean, now after again all this adrenaline, you've got to be exhausted, right? You've got to be numb, right? You've got to be thinking, what's going on? Did I do the right things? Could I've done something different? But now here we are. Boom, the period of chaos is over. Our first step is to try to wrap things up. Okay, what's our next step? So what happened there?
Yeah. And my dog's wrapped around a pole. Is it okay if you give me a minute to just
Yeah,
get him?
go get your dog. Absolutely. Right. Yeah.
So
So next step. So you're in that situation now. How do you start unraveling the timeline? How do you start moving forward? Directly after that chaos. Boom. Now what's the situation?
yeah, so this is not a instruction book on how to navigate that, because I probably didn't do it well in a lot of ways, but I stayed on that hill in the rain for about 25 minutes watching other cars, observe what's now like three cars barely out of the fast lane traffic, skidding to avoid them. And I'm like petrified that if another car accident happens, especially if it sends the wreckage into the other lanes and not the shoulder, which is the only thing that I had access to, that this could turn into like hundreds of cars, right? So I'm still like just petrified of what could happen. A couple minutes later, a tow truck shows up, and the tow truck driver was just casually walking up and down this freeway shoulder, exactly where all the mayhem had happened and could easily happen again, picking up car parts and stuff. And I kind of ran on down and like yelled at him, like, "Hey, you can't do that or shouldn't do that." And he was completely dismissive, because nobody really had the overall perspective that I had. And then he's kind of dismissive, and I just think I can't watch another person die here, so I just try to go back up the hill and call 911 again. And the lady kept saying like, "Okay, we're on our way, and just make sure you're safe." And we've had a couple calls, and I said, I had already called like twice. I said some of those calls are for me, but I said there's a fatality now. And I got pretty upset, and she said, just make sure you're in a safe place. I said, look, I'm in the safest place I can be given the circumstances, but I said, this is just also so sad, just so sad. And the tow truck guy came, and so probably about the 25-minute mark after I got up on that hill, EMS shows up, fatality. They closed down all 5 lanes. I mean, traffic is like backed up for hours. And now we're walking around the scene just freely because there's all these EMS vehicles. And I meet this guy, a different tow truck driver, and he said, "Were you in the accident?" I said, "No." I pulled over and I told him, why I was there. And he said, "Oh yeah." He said, one of the friends of the guy that died is sitting in my tow truck. And I look up and I see this kid with a white shirt. As I got closer, I saw he had red shorts, red shoes, sitting in this guy's passenger seat of his pickup truck, sobbing. And I said, "Hey man, is it okay if I go sit in your driver's seat?" And he said, "Absolutely." So I kind of went into the tow truck, and it was the same kid that I had pulled off the free. I probably neglected to say the kid standing on the freeway that I hugged had a white shirt and red shorts. So it was that kid. So now that kid who survived is in this tow truck, and I get into the truck, and we pretty much have the same conversation 30 minutes later. He's like, "My best friend died, my homie died." And I said, "I'm sorry." And I didn't know what to do. And I just said, "Do you want to pray that God welcomes your buddy into heaven?" And he said, "Yeah." And he kind of gave me his hand, and I just kind of mustered whatever I could or felt, appropriate to say. And then suddenly I realized, wait, there was 3 of them. I know one kid's dead, and I didn't know what happened. Then I said, well, what about your other friend? And he said, oh, he's up there in that Honda Accord. So it turns out that the kid that got thrown 20 feet in the air survived. And this is the kid in the Honda Accord, critically injured. But, and then their other friend was the one that got crushed in between the cars, and that's who died. So I get out of that tow truck. I walk up to the Honda Accord and I kind of bang on the window, and and again, we're all like drenched, right? And I see this young kid just like hunched over, and he rolls down the window, and I said, are you George? He said, yeah. And I said, David sent me over to make sure you're okay. And the kid kind of comes out of his fog. He's like, oh my God, is David okay? I said, David's okay. He's in a tow truck over there, but he wanted me to make sure you're okay. And I said, do you want to say a prayer that God welcomes your buddy, the kid that died? His name was Brian. And I said that God welcomes Brian to heaven. And he said, yeah. And this is the kid that got flown, tossed 20 feet in the air. So he hands me his hand, and like, it's difficult to explain, but other than the fact that it was probably 98.6 degrees, like it was like lifeless, right? This kid was just, I mean, he just got thrown 20 feet in the air, right? In a car accident. And I just held his hand, and, he had gotten into the car of somebody else who had finally stopped. And then, so I prayed with them. And then I bumped into the couple, this 20-year-old couple. They were the ones that I originally put in my car from the first car accident. And they were heading to Long Beach, and they had no way to, get there. And I mean, Long Beach was not on my way, but I just said, I'll just freaking drive you to Long Beach, and they said, well, we have a friend coming to meet us, and if you could bring us to a connection point. It was this young 20, I think she was 21, he was 20. So I get in the car, I leave, we drive about 20 miles, sitting at this gas station, and they were young kids, and they said, you saved our life. And I said, well, that's nice to say. I'm just glad you guys are okay. And they said, no, like, we spun out and we were just like Googling, like, how do you find a tow truck? Right. Like, we had no idea what to do. And incidentally, while they were sitting there on the shoulder, they were the first ones to spin out. And then the other car in the first accident had lost control, bounced off the hill, and like flew over the hood of their car before it had spun out. It was kind of crazy, but they said, we didn't know what to do, and you knew what to do, and you got us out of our car and put us in your car and all this other stuff. And then seconds later, their car gets totaled and stuff. A lot of times you kind of force outcomes, and you start deciding like, this is what I need for this all to be okay, having no idea what you need. But I took a lot of comfort in watching them get out of their car and get into their friend's car. And I really convinced myself that that was all I would need, which it wasn't. And then I went home, and, I was a bit upset about it as I was kind of reliving it over the next couple of days. Like a knucklehead, I didn't take any time off. And then I found myself in Merrill Lynch offices, kind of, telling the story and getting upset in a financial advisor's office, which is, probably not a good look on me or my employer. But I tried to get back to normal as much as possible. But I mean, I had like vivid flashbacks for a long time. And those flashbacks, at least early on, take you back physically, identically. And you and I know we're big believers in kind of manifesting and training. And you hear about these elite athletes that can kind of visualize their run or their sprint or their running their route in their head, and how those muscles actually fire in the right sequence, like even when you're imagining and visualizing it, which is a beautiful thing. Well, with post-traumatic stress and involuntary flashbacks, like I was constantly being brought back to the physicality of being in that situation, which honestly is pretty exhausting. So that's the way it started. It got better over time, but not as quickly as you'd want or hope. And it took me a good 3 years to probably resolve the event to get to the point where it is now, which is, it'll never go away, but I've squeezed some good things out of it, but I also wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Did you have to go get some professional help, or were you able to do this on your own, or?
Yeah. So I did. I started going to therapy. I wasn't going to therapy at the time. I started going to therapy. I probably didn't do a good job of advocating for myself. And the first therapist, we kind of started talking about different things, and and she didn't really ask too much about car accident. Maybe I didn't do a good job of explaining how much it was affecting me. And then I had my college roommate and close friend, Colby Durnan, is just a great operator and executor, and juggles a lot of chainsaws, and he's a member of YPO, Young Presidents Organization, and as you probably know, like, you don't just sign up for that. Like, you have to run companies with X amount of revenue, Y amount of employees, or whatever. So he had this group of guys in his, business owners in his chapter, but it's a worldwide organization. And he said, "Hey man, you should check out this thing called the Hoffman process." I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Well, I don't know, but a lot of YPO members go." And he said, "There's two guys in my chapter. One guy had a rotten childhood and has a great life after Hoffman. Another guy had a great childhood, went to Hoffman, and his life continues to be great." And like a good friend, I basically ignored him and just thought it was going to get better. And about 6 months later, I mean, I felt like it was one step forward, two steps back. I mean, I was just wrapped up in this, making some progress in certain areas. A year later, I parted ways with Lincoln. They actually stuck with me and extended a lot of latitude. I'm still grateful for that they didn't have to do for that next year. And then suddenly I'm without a job. I got a wife and two kids and everything. And I wind up, Colby brings up Hoffman to me again. And I go, "Well, 6 months ago, I asked you what it is. You didn't know." And he's like, "I don't know." He goes, "Why don't you talk to one of my buddies that went?" So I talked to this guy, the guy with the great childhood and the great adulthood. And he said, "What's eating you?" And I kind of told him a little bit. And he's like, "Dude, go to Hoffman." "I'm just telling you to go." I said, "All right." And I'm usually not liquid with a couple extra $1,000 lying around, but I happen to have it at that point. And he said, "Go to Hoffman." And he said, "Do every single thing they tell you to do." And I was like, "All right, man, look, we got a friend in common and I don't know what to do." And I happen to, the price tag wasn't scaring me away because I happen to have the money at that time. And he had basically said, "Look, my wife sent me," and I went begrudgingly. And he said, "But if it means anything, I'm now paying for every member of my senior leadership team to go on my dime." I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And he said, "Go and do everything they tell you." He said, "My biggest regret was that I half-assed it in the first couple days. But when I saw where this process was bringing you, it really regretted that I didn't go deeper." And he said, "The first 2 days is miserable because you really uncover just a lot of like the root causes of why you respond to things." And so anyway, I went and it was really, really pivotal. I would recommend Hoffman to probably anybody. It doesn't really matter what you're going through. They always talk about if you want lasting change, go to Hoffman. I've made way more progress in individual therapy since going to Hoffman. So that was a big turning point. And then also I discovered EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I always like to bring this up because not everybody has the time and a couple $1,000s to go to Hoffman, although it'd be the greatest gift somebody ever gave to themselves. Not everybody can do that, and I understand that. So the other thing that was really helpful, Bob, is this EMDR therapy, which nobody really knows why it works, so I'm not going to go into it, but I heard about it, and my wife came across two women that had like very late-term miscarriages and processed that grief or trauma through EMDR. I'm like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And I just Googled EMDR in my local area and I had a conversation with a therapist. I said, "Look, I'm not here to self-diagnose. You're the psychologist. I'm not. If you tell me that there's something better than EMDR, I'm open to it. But I want to hear that from somebody who does EMDR." And, did an interview and she said, "Yeah." She's like, "I think this would be, really helpful." And, most of us have access to a therapist or certainly more of us than have access to the cost to go away for 6 days to Hoffman. And those two things were very, very helpful um in me processing that. And, thirdly, it's really not third, it should be first, but also, I've slowly kind of found my way back into my faith. And I think one of the reasons I reacted to that whole event and took so long to process it is I was really intellectualizing a lot of it and not really, surrendering a lot of that to, uh, you know, to the Lord's. Long answer to your short question.
I mean, I think we need to be cautious too, though, right? Because I truly believe that no matter where your faith is, if you need help, you need to go get help, right?
Mm.
I truly believe that God can cure us from any affliction. He does it through he sometimes it doesn't happen as a miracle. All of a sudden, I'm free. It's well, this person's trained this, and this is the one they need to go see. So yeah, you know, I think, I've had some therapy, and I think that it's well placed, and again, take advantage of it. Man, it helps us work out through a lot of issues and some stress. So okay, so you had this jungle moment, right? Great experience. Thanks so much for sharing. That's a lot. I know I can see on your face that it hurt you. You're going back through it, right? It's you're reliving everything. So now here you are, a year later, you don't have a job, you got a wife, two kids, and now what the heck are you going to do? And did any of this experience give you that energy or that focus or the wisdom to move in the direction where, Design My Medicare came from that? I mean, walk us through that, because this is right.
Yeah.
This is the obstacle, and the obstacle that you did there in the chaos, and the obstacle working through this, and now the obstacle, now I don't have work. I got to go find something to do. Where does that energy come from?
Yeah, honestly, it was a balance of inspiration and desperate necessity. I mean, I always tell people freely, like, I basically built my business during a mental health crisis, right? Which is really kind of trying to resolve that event. And I don't know if there's a trophy for that, but I would imagine it's I'd imagine it might not be that common. But ultimately, so yeah, like year goes by, we part ways. I had taken a couple months off. Lincoln was great. I, and again, I was this excuse maker, and I probably could have stretched it into some long-term disability claim. We were pretty much, didn't really have many financial resources at all. And rather than go with even explore I knew I wasn't going to like where it was going to bring me mentally, to figure out how do I extend this get paid for not working thing. And nobody needed to get paid more for not working than me at that time, but I didn't really see it that way because I kept thinking I can manage this, right? So I kind of let everything move forward, and I remember we have I'll tell you this. Andy Clark, the divisional manager I told you about, to this day, when I see him, I go, and I'm just going to say the whole thing, and you could decide whether to edit it out. But when I see Andy, I go, Andy, I just hope that if you ever need an organ donated, it's something I have two of, because I'll say yes before I even know. And I just say, for the love of God, don't be the penis, right? But Andy was great, and I remember being on that phone call with him and Jillian Buckner, who I think is still at HR at Lincoln. I'm forever grateful for the way she handled this whole thing as well. But like, I remember feeling bad for Andy, because I just think it was time, right? It had to be done, and the separation was initiated by Lincoln, but I remember feeling bad for Andy, because I just don't think it was an easy phone call for him. And I was just like getting a little bit used to this rapid acceptance thing. Like, it is what it is, right? So anyway, so now I don't have a job, get a little bit of unemployment. The place that we're renting goes up for sale, and I don't really have the resources to move somewhere else. But even prior to that, I hung a shingle. I started like wholesaling some term life and Lincoln Money Guard, which is the only two things I knew in the insurance industry, just to the independent advisors I knew, which was not the biggest portion of my advisor relationships. And I'm just keeping busy. I'm not really making any money. And I had been exposed to Medicare a little bit sooner. And honestly, I knew it was a recurring revenue business model. I knew there was a lot of well-intentioned education being directed at advisors about Medicare. I didn't see or forecast that there was a lot of results coming from that, which is not me trying to wag a finger. I was just trying to figure out, well, where's the drop off? Why are the well-intentioned insurance companies like Prudential and Lincoln and Nationwide offering education to advisors on Medicare? It was difficult for me to believe there were any real quantifiable results, which turned out to be the case. So one, that felt like, hey, maybe there's a symbiotic way for me to continue to work with my financial advisor relationships without having to get hired from some big Fortune 500 insurance company. You and I both know, like, you got this great job, great relationship. Suddenly you're not employed and you can't monetize those relationships until you get the next company to hire you who has access to Merrill Lynch, right? And you and I have been through that and talked about how, how that kind of can mess with your psyche. So this had nothing to do with that. This is me just going directly to the advisor. So I had a theory, and the theory felt good. I felt like I understood the financial advisor audience and the financial planning process enough. And I thought, I guess the way to look at it is, my initial theory, Bob, was that the well-intentioned education being delivered to the financial advisors kind of felt like pitching the first 8 innings for the financial advisor, leaving the mound empty on the 9th inning and saying, Bob, I hope this works out. Why don't you keep Nationwide or Prudential in mind for your next annuity transaction, right? And that 9th inning wasn't getting pitched, therefore there was no results. So that's what I had theorized. Additionally, as high sounding as that sounds, here I am digging through the rubble of my career saying, what do I have? Well, I have relationships with financial advisors, always been pretty good about keeping those up. And I felt like I observed a gap that could be filled. So all that sounds very nice from a business development standpoint. The other part of it, Bob, honestly, was, I had people saying, Brian, man, you need to make a living. Just go chase down, big life insurance cases and do some max funded IUL with premium financing and get a $50,000 commission. And again, in this new and building skill of rapid acceptance of what is and is not possible, every time somebody said that, number one, I thought I built my whole career around relationships with advisors. All I got to do is do helpful things that they don't do. And regardless what it is, I just thought Medicare would be the vehicle. And so far it is. But that's number one. Number two is I still have flashbacks, bringing the physicality and the sequential muscle triggering of that moment coming in, daily, and then eventually maybe not daily, 5 days a week or 4 days a week, right? And I had to come to terms and say, you know what, man, I don't think I can go chasing a $50,000 life insurance commission, which is also a violation of my loyalty to advisors, but because I was like, I have some bad days here, and I don't get an email to say tomorrow is going to be a bad day. And I'm like, I can't blow a 120-day sales cycle because Brian is trapped in flashbacks for 2 days straight. And the thing about Medicare is I thought, you know what? This is simple. It's repeatable. I'm not going to get rich on it quick, but it's recurring revenue, which, as wholesalers, we always look on very positively because financial advisors build their business that way. And I thought, if I have a bad day, I don't think the world's going to collapse in a Medicare pipeline, which is going to require way more people to say yes. So in some ways, I kind of started the business partially out of inspiration and just trying to piece together a couple of, dusty resources from my previous career, but it was also out of necessity to navigate this mental health event.
So let me take a look at a couple of things here. All right, so I'm going to go back. Okay, so here we are. The moments of chaos, then to your time of recovery, then which is still going on, it appears, right? Then to making a decision to start a business. But you talked in the beginning about gratitude and acceptance. Gratitude and acceptance. So now how does gratitude and acceptance now fall into priority in your life today?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I feel like I'm kind of living my second life. And that might sound hokey, but I've processed that event about as much as it can be, but in a lot of ways, every decision I make today feels more tethered to that moment 10 years ago than even my childhood, right? Like it's almost like living a second adult life, which is okay. And I think gratitude is really powerful, and even though it might not be my first reaction, I'm at a point in my life where I'm usually aggressively pursuing where the gratitude is, because that's usually way more productive for me and everybody around me to focus on than dwelling on something that's, less than ideal or even awful or bad or anything like that. So I think it becomes a mental mind game of how quickly can you find your path to gratitude. And gratitude can be found in very simple things. And saw something on Facebook yesterday of somebody who's saying, if you're try to not complain for an entire week, and if you're trapped in traffic, rather than complain about being trapped in the traffic, express your gratitude to God that you have this moment sitting in the car to talk to him, right? Or that you even have a car or a place to go or things like that. And I got to tell you, man, I don't wake up in the morning, full of rainbows and unicorns, right? And that's okay. I used to judge that, but it might not be my first reaction. But I think also when you have negative feelings, like if you're in therapy, the therapist will ask you, where do you feel that? And maybe everybody's answer is different. I think a lot of times it's kind of in your solar plexus. Like, I don't know, to me, probably always, it would be for me. So also when I start feeling negative, or I can feel it physically, and I've used that as a tool to say, oh, this is the feeling, right? Which you would think is easy. But so much of like anxiety is like suppression and not connecting with how you feel, right? So I just let my solar plexus or my gut just give off that feeling. And now I'm grateful for that because when I feel that, I go, oh, yeah, I don't like feeling this. Well, what am I thinking that's feeding this? Well, that's not the way I want to think or feel about this, right? What's something to be grateful for, right? And it just becomes kind of the this much bigger part of my life than it's ever been, to find that path to gratitude as rapidly as possible.
Yeah, if we take a look at gratitude, right? And I love how that I didn't see that on Facebook, but I love that, right? You're in traffic, and there's a silver lining to everything, right? Now, my wife snores, and when I get woken up by her snoring, I've got to have this mental attitude. I'm grateful that she snores because I know she's in the bed next to me, right?
Mhm.
And I use that as an example because we are more impacted negatively throughout the course of the day. Just my discussions with myself. I'm a positive guy. I can be
Right.
positive to everybody else, but man, when it comes time to get into my own cranium, we're negative. It's just part of our lifestyle, part of our choices, etc. But being giving gratitude is amazing. And there's some days where, I'm grateful for the feel of the sun on my skin, right? I can't be any more emotional than that. But man, we
Right.
got to find it, because I think that, like you said, you in your solar plexus, I say inside of our psyche, inside of our soul is where we feel that. I think kind of the same area. Now let me ask you this, because again, people in our industry, we think we're in control, and we get upset, or we get nasty, or we react when we realize that there's something out there that we can't control, right? And I see that in your personality. I know back in Sun America, right? You're in control of dialing the phone, but you're not in control of what the person on the other phone says, and it
Right.
it it, it has that ability to anger us and give us anxiety. So where are you from on that standpoint about being a person that enjoys control?
Yeah, well, I don't think anybody on earth would ever associate the name Brian MacArthur with perfectionist. But even if you're not a perfectionist, man, the inability to see the perfect path to execute is a wonderful way to delay action. And that was probably a tool I used a lot. And I mean, I'll tell you that even though I chose this business, which has really become an amazing blessing, and while I'm so grateful for my time as a wholesaler, I needed that in order to find this, and this is even better than I've got, 3 employees now. We got a great team. We help hundreds of advisors across the country with this Medicare process. But, like I said, man, I mean, talk about the rapid evaporation of excuses. Excuses are a luxury. And I know that because when I started this business, the only thing I had was my relationships with advisors, some advisors that would just take a meeting with me just because we knew each other for a long time, some awareness of what they go through, and my enthusiasm. And there was nothing to be enthusiastic rationally in my life. I mean, obviously, I still have my family and kids, but like we were about to lose our home. I had a college buddy take my whole family in for a and, had everybody around me just saying, why don't you just go get a regular job? What are you doing with this Medicare thing? Medicare is like to start it from scratch and not have any other income is kind of clinically insane, but that's the path I chose. And I kind of forced everybody around me to have to be patient with that. But I had no choice but to take action. And I was a great delayer of taking action. And suddenly, dude, there was nothing left to do besides take action. As grateful as we were to live with this other family, like it's not ideal for anybody. And here I am with like the world crumbling around me, still dealing personally with this mental health event. And then not to mention how it's affecting my wife and the kids were in first, second grade, that sort of thing. And then I went out and started talking to advisors, and mostly my theories were right, but of course they were refined over time. And then suddenly these financial advisors are calling up clients, demonstrating leadership on Medicare, sending them to us way more rapidly than my phone's ringing way more than it ever had as a wholesaler. And very quickly, I'm like, as a wholesaler, like if the wholesaler's calendar is empty, they're not working very hard, right? Well, suddenly my calendar is absolutely full, going from meeting to meeting to meeting. And I'm getting this validation from the advisors and these high net worth clients that I know what I'm talking about. And here and there, I'm, bringing somebody's enrollment to the point that I actually generate a little bit of revenue, which is like 3-figure revenue. It's not big money, but it'll build recurring. And in the midst of all this chaos and turmoil and, navigating this event, my career has now pivoted to where I feel way more valued than I ever did as a wholesaler, and I'm in demand and things like that. And I just kept taking action, which was not, I was not as good at that as I don't like admitting it out loud, but as a wholesaler, I was not much of an action taker. And in some ways, building the business probably contributed to like saving my life because I suddenly had this validation that, hey, my theory was correct. People are reaching out to me. Every time, Bob, I went to go, should I get a job delivering pizza, right? Or in a grocery store, which I would get to the ninth inning on those conversations. And I kept realizing, man, if I spend 40 hours a week in a grocery store, it's 40 hours less a week that I have to build this Medicare business. And I had to tell my wife several times, like, look, I'm a couple months into this and I'm already waking up every morning and my calendar's packed. I've never been this busy before. And it was tough. And I had another team that was a financial advisor team doing about $3 million in revenue. And I went to go meet them. They were going to bring me on as kind of a junior partner and they were like big municipal bond fixed income guys. And they said, hey, you just do all the financial planning. And they said, what's it going to take? And I said, guys, I'm about to be the guy that I used to kind of snicker at when I was a wholesaler, where I'd walk into the office and I'd see this guy in his 40s showing up day one in his cubicle, not an office, but a cubicle with a picture of his family and saying with a straight face he needs $100,000 to start off. I go, but I think that's what it's going to take in order for me to not be distracted and do this. And they said yes. They were going to fund half of it. They were going to have the branch manager fund the half of it. And Bob, nobody needed a $100,000 W-2 on paper more than me in that moment. Like day one, that would have gotten me to move my family into an apartment and stuff like that. And not proud of this, but I've had a couple beers with these guys since and taken ownership of it. But I was so desperate that once it was going to move forward, and I was already on this Medicare thing. And I just thought, Brian, you got to be real. These guys are going to invest out of their pocket for your salary? The branch manager, who I'd known, he'd managed a couple offices. And I just, again, got this rapid acceptance of reality. And I just thought, Brian, a year from now, you're going to feel like you stole their money, even if they don't accuse you of stealing their money. So I wound up ghosting them and I stopped returning their phone calls because I knew if I returned their phone calls, I was going to take the job. And I was going to have this and I wanted to see this Medicare thing through. So that happened relatively early in the year that we were living with another family. And it was not easy on either family. But I didn't take that job and I just worked like a rented mule. I remember I wouldn't even get up to kiss my kids goodbye. They had to come to the desk in my wife's buddy's office. She had a little desk for me because I thought if I take an hour off, it's an hour longer. We need to live here. And during that year, 2017, I lost 25 pounds. My wife lost 20. It wasn't from, healthy diet and exercise. My wife and I ate one meal a day so the kids could eat three. And the other thing that's interesting is like during this time, I'm getting all this professional validation amid all this other chaos. I was physically hungry. So to this day, I don't really like eating lunch. I mean, don't worry. I gained back the 25 pounds I lost and more, which is why I'm glad on the angle of this camera. But man, I was physically hungry while I was building the business, and I had, several different people just reach out and just kind of bless us with little things along the way that kind of made it possible, and really had to lean on, other people's kindness in ways I'm forever grateful for. And, I always hope I'm, repaying that relationship in some way, or at least paying it forward.
Yeah, one thing that I constantly talk about is the value of relationships. And we're created as relationship people, and we're built to have relationships. And when we remove relationships, that's usually a identifier of a downward spiral, right? And the more we remove relationships, the more of a downward spiral we go into. So when we're anxious, when we're feeling stressed, when we're feeling depressed, we safety cord and get rid of those relationships. We have to stick with those. But man, good for you that you had those relationships, and people wanted to help you, but also good for you too with the wholesalers build good relationships. I mean, I've got relationships with financial advisors across this country that, I mean, it's crazy, right? It's like, Bob, how do you know that person? I'm like that, I used to call on them, used to knock on their door, met them, met them at an event, right? Met them at a wholesaling event. They were there and we were paying for it. So, yeah. So, man, we've talked, believe it or not, we've been going for about an hour and 20 minutes now. So let me ask you this. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
The website is designmymedicare.com, or you could email me at Brian with an I at designmymedicare.com. That's probably the best way to reach on out. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. I know you are as well. So LinkedIn's actually been another blessing. Like it's actually been a pretty meaningful part of our brand and business development over the years. So I'm pretty easy to find there as well.
Yeah, I was surprised today. I dropped a podcast today. Tim Mann, you remember Tim Mann? Remember
I
Tim?
sure do.
So I dropped my podcast with him today. And I mean, there are so many people from LinkedIn already jumped on, and I was surprised by how many views it's already gotten. Kind of surprising. But your story is as powerful as his. And I mean, this story needs to get out. And thanks for spending some time with me to get this story to get this story out. And it's encouraging. That it's also encourages people that are going through tough times, or people that have gone through that chaotic situation that causes some type of a PTSD, some type of mental health event, to really go out and get some help. So, what final thoughts? Give me some a final thought or two that we could end.
Well, I never, one, thank you for making the time and making this opportunity available. I just always love watching what you're doing and enjoy your perspective, and just getting to spend time with you is awesome. The other thing sometimes I wonder, so on a relative basis, I was probably a 50th percentile wholesaler, when the wind was at my back. In the Medicare space, I mean, there's plenty of bigger players, right? But on the whole, if you lined up 100 Medicare agencies, our business at this point would probably be enviable to many. There's plenty of growth to have. But the only reason I bring that up, Bob, is that one of the things I often wonder if might be a gift I could give to others is to kind of help that mediocre performer kind of identify and eliminate the things that are keeping them from being a top performer. Because to your earlier point, we can just be so brutal to ourselves. And I'm not saying I've nailed it on eliminating that entirely, but I'm better at it than I've ever been. And really, I have to say, like, there's much positivity for you and everybody around you when you can really step on the throttle and accomplish anything, whether it's business or not, right? To me, I'm just intoxicated by trying to optimize and grow our business and find out how to serve advisors better, and just see what I'm almost fueled in curiosity to see what we can really turn it into. I would imagine and even top performers, sometimes you have these mediocre moments and you go, how did I get here? And I used to know how to get out of this. But, taking action and imperfect action is really terrific. I mean, I will now take action knowing it'll be imperfect, but as I observe the deliverable, it's so much easier for me than theorizing and trying to make it perfect before you launch it. Like I just, push the boulder down the hill and see which way it's rolling, and then, adjust it as you can. And it's a skill that escaped me for longer than I'd like to admit. But if you take the action, it feels good. You get these dopamine hits. You'll immediately just say like, I think I could do that a little bit better, right? Well, then you're going to do it better, even if you're not the most action-oriented person. Once you've taken some action and you're like, oh, this could be twice as better with 10% more input, you're going to do it. And so I just encourage anybody that is just maybe not getting their optimal results, perhaps as a result of suboptimal effort or just kind of some mental gunk. If I could play a small role in helping somebody like that, I would consider that a great, privilege and blessing. And I'm sure I'm not the only person that could help, but I'm at least one person who'd be willing to.
Hey, Brian, thanks so much for taking the time today. Really, am thankful. I'm grateful that you took the time. I'm grateful that you shared the story. This is a powerful story. We're going to get it out quick, and people need to hear it. So thanks for being transparent. Thanks for being open, and thanks for being willing to spend some time with us.
My pleasure, Bob. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing for the whole community and inside and outside the financial services community. We appreciate you.
Thanks so much. All right.
Thanks for trekking with us on the Leadership Expedition podcast, where we don't play it safe, stay small, or stay silent. If today's episode sparked something in you, share it, and remember, leadership isn't a destination, it's a daring daily decision. Stay courageous, stay authentic, and keep leading like your life depends on it, because it does.